Hey there, everyone. Welcome to yet another Teach Kelvin Your Thing session. In today's session, I will be learning Redwood with Anthony. So, how you doing, Anthony?
Hey, what's up? I'm doing good. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm really excited because I think I heard about Redwood a couple of years ago, and I've been interested and really looking out for someone who's going to be available to come on the show to teach me Redwood because it's really sounded interesting. So before we go into Redwood land or the woods, could you please introduce yourself? Tell us who Anthony is, what you do, what you've been doing, and just anything you want to share.
Yeah, sure thing. So, my name is Anthony Campolo. I am a developer advocate at Edgio, which is a deployment platform. And I've been interested in Redwood and working on it for quite a while. Actually, I first got into the framework back in like 2020 when it was first announced. I was actually a bootcamp student at the time and was trying to get into web dev, and I was interested in open source and saw that there's a lot of these different frameworks like coming out, especially in the React world, which is what I was learning in my boot camp. And I just kind of started writing about it and then speaking about it, and then eventually going to like meetups and getting to know the team. And yeah, they eventually invited me on as a core member in like late 2020. And I got my first dev job a couple months after that. It was actually the two were very closely correlated. I kind of credit Redwood with getting me my first job in tech. So it's a really great community. It's welcoming to beginners, and if you're an expert, it's also good. We say it's a app framework for startups. We really pitch it as something for building companies and really using it for serious production workloads. So really happy to kind of explain it and talk about what it is.
Yeah, for sure. So the question I have right now is, what about Redwood really got you like, whoa, this is, and I feel because you mentioned you've not used any other framework before you used Redwood. Is that true?
I wouldn't say I hadn't used any other framework. And it kind of depends. The whole
Mm-hmm.
question was a framework. I'd used like Create React App, and I'd
Okay.
used Gatsby to kind of generate like a blog starter. I had used Next just like very sparingly at the time, and I kind of played around with like a little bit of Svelte and Vue stuff. But to answer your question about what made Redwood different, the thing that made
Mm-hmm.
Redwood different really is that it was to me like a full stack framework, because at the time when I was doing my boot camp, we were building like a full stack React project using Create React App hooked up to an Express server that then would hit a Postgres database, and you'd use Axios, and you would kind of manage the auth and the backend server, and kind of creating that whole project, that whole workflow. It was very challenging, and to the point where we had these projects, we had these like build weeks where people who were at every different point within their boot camp journey would have to get together and build an actual app that would like function and run, that a user could log in and just do something. It could be just like save a bookmark or something like that. But I did four of those, and all four of those projects did not actually ship in a functional form to the point where a user could log in and do the base functionality. And I thought that was kind of incredible because it was both like really a failing of the boot camp that they couldn't actually set us up for success, but also a failing of the tech stack to make it so challenging to even make a functioning app. Like it really shocked me. And when I then used Redwood, I saw that you could basically generate a whole project that already had the back end and already had a database and already had an authentication solution. And you could run a command that would set up your auth, and you could run a command that would deploy your project. And I found that in one day, I could build the same project by myself that in a week the group could not. And so that's when I realized there was really something unique happening here. And this is actually a tool that would be very beneficial to beginners, despite the seeming complexity of the whole thing and all the different tools and cutting edge tech. I actually found it incredibly simple to use.
Hmm. That ma- I, I feel that makes a lot of sense because I like a tool that lets you move fast, right? So from what you're explaining
Mhm.
right now, it feels as with Redwood, it sort of take cares of the table stakes, the things you would normally need for your app, and just give you like a really a push. So you've actually covered more ground by just making the app. You have authentication, which is something most app would need. So you should not have to write that all the time yourself, right? So Redwood just gonna do that. That makes a whole lot of sense. So in a nutshell, how does Redwood compare with other full stack frameworks out there? Like what's in Redwood, for example? Like what makes up all the technologies it puts together to make up Redwood?
Yeah, the main things to like kind of break it down to its core is that Redwood is really a React front end and a Node back end. And the thing that is most important is that it uses GraphQL to mediate between the front end and back end. So you need to know a little bit of GraphQL to use it, but not a lot. Because when I first used the framework, I had never used GraphQL at all. But the thing that separates it, I think, from other frameworks like Next or Nuxt or SvelteKit is the ORM layer. So a lot of people will use Prisma with those frameworks, but you're usually bringing in Prisma separately as its own dependency, and you'll install it. Then you'll kind of write a Prisma schema, and then you'll create your backend kind of like service logic, and you'll do all of that from scratch. Whereas with Redwood, you already have Prisma actually embedded within the CLI, so you can run Redwood commands that are kind of aliasing to Prisma commands, and you already have generator commands that will write a lot of your Prisma logic for you. And then there's also the built-in auth provider, as I mentioned, which allows you to kind of hook into other things. And now, you have things like NextAuth or third parties like Clerk that make it pretty easy to integrate that into things like Next, Nuxt, or SvelteKit, but it's like Prisma, where you're installing a different dependency, you're wiring it up yourself. Whereas Redwood, there's conventions. So that's the main thing, is that's
Mhm.
convention over configuration. I
Yeah.
would say today the framework I find is most comparable to it is called Create T3 app, which is something that was kind of created by Nexel and Julius and a lot of the community around Theo. So if you know who Theo is, you know that community, you know all those people and kind of what's going on. If not, you might not be super hip to it, but it's basically Next.js plus the extra stuff that Redwood gives you. So it also has Prisma already auto configured. It has an auth provider auto configured. And so I find that that's kind of the most comparable full stack JavaScript framework around right now. But with things like Nuxt, Next, Remix, SvelteKit, Solid Start, Quick City, all of those kind of take you all the way to the database layer and then drop you off there and say you can figure out how to connect your database. They'll give you serverless functions. And so people will say that they're full stack frameworks, or some people even say they're backend frameworks. But to me, Redwood and Create T3 app are kind of the only real true full stack JavaScript frameworks if you're using that term in relation to things like Rails and Laravel and Django.
Interesting. That's a strong claim. I like it. Yeah, so I get the point where, with the, let's say something like Next or Noxt, I think they're more focused in the client more than a complete robust app that needs access to the database, manage your schemas and all. If you need to do that, then you're probably going to do serverless, or you need a separate backend. But with what you're saying now, you can have everything in one place with Redwood, and it all pieces nicely together. So yeah, that sounds fun. So I am intrigued enough to want to start seeing the code and how the JX play, because I'm a big Sales.js guy for the full stack. I made a stack called the Vite stack, where it's Vue, Inertia, Tailwind, and Sales. It really plays well for me, where Vue is on my front end and Sales take care of all the emphasis stuff. We have an ORM and everything. So that is the true north stuff for me. So
That's cool.
seeing
So
the
you
DX.
you
Yeah.
already built a version of this then.
Yeah. So I think that would be a year ago. So it uses something called inertia. Inertia is like a protocol that lets you
Mhm.
the Svelte, the React view, you could mix them with your backend, but their components are going to be your front end, and all the routes will be handled with your backend, the database access and everything. It's I just love the stack. But let's see Redwood and the DX and everything. Are you ready to get into it?
Yeah, and just kind of last quick
Okay.
point out on what you said. That's
For
really interesting because it's true that a lot of people will build things like this, and
Mhm.
this is something I have a podcast, FS Jam, which is full stack jam stack, and the idea is that it's like the full like the jam stack plus the back end to
Yeah.
give you the full stack. And my co-host Chris used to always say we were all building Redwood before Redwood, because he felt that he had already created this stack and then he saw a framework that had actually done it. And it's a similar thing with what you're talking about.
Yeah.
You kind of create your own framework that added in that backend layer using Laravel, which it's a project I haven't used yet, but I've heard of, and I think is very interesting.
Yeah, so my stack is JavaScript from top to bottom. It uses
Mm-hmm.
Sales. Sales is an MVC framework akin to Laravel. So it does server-side templating using EJS. But being a Vue guy, I wanted a way where I build single-page application. So this was the use case for me. Before I have a platform, salescast.com, where the front end was a Noxt app and the back end was a sales API. But I felt there was no need for this. So I was thinking if there's a way to have a single page application and everything still be in the same code base, and I use my backend logic, my backend policy, my backend middleware, my backend routes, instead of duplicating it across the stack. And that was where I found out Inertia, which came out from the Laravel ecosystem that let you do this. Then I wrote an adapter for sales, which everything, of course, I like Tailwind, and it created a Vite stack. So I made a stack that I feel pretty comfortable with shipping. And yeah, so that's what the Vite stack is. And that's in a nutshell.
That's cool. That's really
Yeah,
cool. But
yeah,
yeah,
for
we
sure.
can get into the code
Yeah,
now.
definitely. Let's do it.
All right. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be kind of following along with this gist here. The Just to kind of go over the outline real quick. What's great about Redwood is it has a CLI that can generate a lot for you. So we can generate pages, we can create database migrations, we can create what are called cells. That's for data fetching. I'll explain that once we get to it. And then you can also run tests and set up Storybook with just a single command. So we'll show a
Mm-hmm.
little bit of that. One of my core team members on the Redwood team was saying that we should really show off the testing and Storybook
Mm-hmm.
capabilities. And then we have the deploy step, we'll deploy it to Vercel. But just to kind of start by showing a bit of the project structure, we have these two main what are called sides. There's the web side and then there's the API side. So the first thing we'll do is just kick off our dev server. So all of the commands are going to start with yarn rw, and then the command that follows. So this is the Redwood splash page that you'll see when you first kick off your dev server with a new blank project. So it gives you some links to tutorial and docs and the community if you want to check it out. We've got a Discord, a forum, and a Twitter account. So highly recommend you check those out. And if we look at our web folder, we have three things here. We have components, layouts, and pages. Now, if we look in the pages folder, we're not actually going to see this because this is just a placeholder until you do actually generate your first page. For the command to do that, all of our commands, as I mentioned, will be starting with yarn rw, and
Okay.
then a generate command, which you can shorten to G, and then the thing you're going to generate. So we're generating a page right now, and we're going to call it the home page, and it's going to go to our home/route. So if this was on ajcwebdev.com, this would just be ajcwebdev/. And if we create that, we're going to see here that we're going to now have a home page. And This is the standard boilerplate. And if we look at here, this is where it takes the word we inserted and it puts it in all these places.
Yeah.
And this here gives us an example of a link as well. So let's look at this file over here. If we want to edit this, we can change this to just say hello world. And then now we got our home page. Now you may be wondering how the routing layer is working.
Yeah.
And to figure that out, we have this routes file. And what the routes file does is it specifies three things for each page. You have a path, which is what the actual route is. You have the page, which is the React component that you're pointing to. And then you have what's called a named route function. The named route function is how you link to it with your A tag or link tag. So if we look here, there's this link to, and then routes.home, and the home is the function that will take you to the home link. So to kind of show a little more clearly what's happening here, let's generate another page. And if we look at what happens with this file, we can kind of see. So here again, yarn Redwood generate page and about, and then we don't have to specify anything afterwards if you want the route and the named route to be the same. So it's going to just take about and insert it into both.
Mhm.
So now we've got this. We have our about path, our about page component, and then our named route function. So over here, we can see we now have an about page. And again, all the places that about was generated into. So you can see how the conventions here are giving you nice guardrails in terms of already giving you a file structure, giving you conventions for how your pages are going to be mapped to the router, and then giving you kind of nice functions that allow you to create links which don't need to be changed anytime you want to kind of change. Like if I want to point the about page to like a different page, then I can just kind of change that in the route file and just point it at a different page, but then all the links will stay the same. So that's pretty nice. If
Nice.
we just change this to say, it just tells you about stuff. We got our about page right now. Now at this point, for the tutorial, you'd usually then go into layouts, but those are not really that interesting. And just for the sake of time and showing other features, I'm going to kind of skip over that. The point of a layout is just to give you like a persistent shell that can persist between different pages. So if you want to have like a nav bar, then you can put that in your layout, and then that will wrap around all your pages. But right now, I'm just going to have these two links right here, which will let us toggle back and forth between our about and our home page. So do you have any questions so far based on all of that?
Yeah, a couple. One is, it's Redwood wrapping React router, or it's its own custom router?
It's its own custom router. So that is a really important part of what made Redwood unique when it first came out, is that it wasn't using React router and it wasn't using Next kind of as like a front end to bolt a back end onto. It was all made from the beginning. So that's why this routing file here, the way it's set up, you won't see this in any other framework. And you see here we're actually importing the a router package from the Redwood JS main. So there's a Redwood JS NPM repo that then links to all these other packages. So if we look in our package.json, we'll see our front end has Redwood Web, Redwood Router, and then Redwood Forms. And in our API, which we'll look at in the next section, we have the Redwood API and then the Redwood GraphQL server. So all of those packages will kind of make up your project. And this is where you actually have a decoupled kind of thing going on here. This is not a monolithic thing in the sense that you install like one thing that has 100 packages in it. You can actually kind of break this apart. If I wanted to entirely delete my web folder and then just have a standalone API, I could do that, or vice versa. If I wanted to delete the API and just have a standalone static front end, you can also
Mhm.
do that.
Cool. So yeah, that's so sort of like two separate packages, or how do I say this? So it's like an API with its own package of JSON, so that's standalone, and the web with its own package of JSON, so that's also standalone. So they are not sharing dependencies or anything; they're just
Mm-hmm.
in the same code base. And the other thing I was going to ask, but I think it's obvious now, it's the UI is a single page application, right?
It is by default. If you
Okay.
want to, you are able to actually make it a multi-page app by using a pre-render keyword. So you can do something like that. And if I did that, it can actually pre-render just an HTML shell with the about page in it, as long as there's no interactivity. So this is one of the things that I thought makes Redwood actually really innovative, and something that now when we're talking about how do you create these frameworks, I can kind of transition between a spa or an MPA. And there's already conventions in Redwood that allows you to just generate new pages on the fly, and you can start and make it entirely a multi-page application. I could pre-render each of these pages, and then it would just ship as multiple pages. Or I can build up a single page application, just build the entire app on the home page. It's really entirely up to you.
Hmm. Yeah, that's totally makes sense. So the pre-rendering is sort of SSR, right?
Yes, it's SSR at build time, not at
Okay.
runtime.
Oh, so that's
As the
startup
one thing
site.
that as the one thing that Redwood is kind of missing right now is that there's no way to do SSR at runtime, but we're going to be there very soon because we're integrating Vite, and then Vite is going
Ooh.
to kind of come along with all that SSR goodness.
Yeah, so right now it's more of SSG, like akin to Astro, if you're doing the pre-rendering attributes, right?
Yeah, it's like an SSG or just like a straight up client
Okay.
side rendered kind of deal, or a multi-page application. So it basically does everything except SSR in the Next.js kind of sense right
Okay.
now. That's the main thing. But aside from that, you can do single page app, multi-page app, you can pre-render pages, you can do a totally static build, you can bring in kind of whatever you want.
Oh, so I noticed you mentioned Vite is coming to Redwood. So what are you running on right now?
Good old Webpack. So
Yay.
this is kind of this framework was invented. It was first started being worked on in 2018, and then the .1 came out in 2020, and
Mhm.
like Vite that hadn't even come out yet. Vite came out, I think 420 2020. So it's been a long journey to kind of rewire it from Webpack to Vite, and that's kind of why it's taken us really like multiple years to get to the point where we're going to be able to kind of flip that switch. And yeah, I'm really excited about it because I think we're, aside from Next, we're probably the only non-Vite framework around anymore.
Yeah, it's a good thing you mentioned it. We're still on Webpack for the stuff I talked about. Still thinking of it because that's where everyone is right now. But yeah, Webpack still works, huh? It's like you wouldn't even notice.
Yeah, it does. I mean, and there's companies that are going to be running Webpack till
Mhm.
you and I are both long gone, I'm willing to bet.
Definitely. Yeah, Webpack is cool. So sure. So those were my questions. So let me let you go on with the database. I love databases. So let's
Yeah.
see. Mm,
Let me real quick have
okay.
this one kicking around from the last time I did this. Let me just delete this real quick. Have you ever used Railway?
No, I've been a render guy for a
Cool.
while.
Yeah. So Railway is a very cool backend as a service, and it lets you spin up Postgres databases really quickly and really easily. Before I do that though, let me explain the Prisma stuff. Have you ever used Prisma before?
No, I've seen it used. I use another called Waterline. So yeah, but I get the
Waterline?
gist. Yeah, Waterline from
Okay.
sales.
Well,
Yeah.
Prisma's gonna change your life.
Oh,
It's
okay.
like really, it's really where I think the JavaScript ORM world has gone. It may already start to become unhip in a year or so as things like Drizzle and Keasley start to become more popular. But
Uh,
as of now, like Prisma is the ORM to use. I think most people would probably agree with that. The one drawback it has is if you're running in a serverless environment, you can have pretty bad cold starts because of the bundle size. But they have products kind of aimed around addressing that with like edge stuff. But if you're just kind of doing a simple demo project, or if you want to get the perf of running in a server, you can do that as well. But let me just real quick break down what's happening here.
cool.
The great thing with Prisma is that you can decide what flavor of SQL or even non-SQL you want to use. So right now we're going to be running Postgres, but I could change this to just say MySQL or SQLite or even, God forbid, MongoDB. And the thing that it does is it takes your model and then it generates the SQL to make it work with whatever flavor of SQL you're using. So if you're using Postgres or MySQL, there'll be slightly different SQL generated. But from the perspective of your app, your model remains unchanged for the most part. If you're switching between a SQL to Mongo, that might not be necessarily the case, but if you're switching between SQL databases, you should be good. I would recommend for the most part just deciding on your database in the beginning and not switching. But if you
Mhm.
want to live dangerously and migrate from SQLite to Postgres halfway through building your project, you technically can do that. You just have to blow away your migrations. But the model is just going to be a simple post. We're making a blog here. And a blog is not necessarily the best example for some of you to actually want to build with Redwood. It's more just kind of like an exercise to help you understand the framework. You're really going to be using this more so for like a real-time kind of functionality. But just for the sake of what we're doing here, this is a good way to conceptualize the project end to end. And the blog post will have an ID, title, body, created at. The ID is an integer, and it has an auto incrementing function here. So each new post will be, ID1, ID2, ID3. You could change this to UUIDs or something like that if you would prefer. And then the title and body both have a string, and then created at will take date, time, and generate it based on what time it is when the blog post is created. So does this kind of all make sense?
For sure. It it looks not with the decorators and stuff, but the convention, the same thing we use in Waterline, and everything makes sense. So cool.
Great.
Yeah.
I'm here to run some commands here with the Railway CLI. This is going to initiate a project and then slap Postgres on the end. One of the things I do like about Railway is that you can spin up projects extremely quickly. And if you so desire, you actually can do this without even creating an account. If you just go to dev.new or railway.app front end new, if I was logged out right now, I could still generate a Postgres database and get a connection string. It would just be wiped in 1 week if I don't claim it with an account. But you
Hmm.
actually don't even need a Railway account to do what I'm showing you right now.
Yeah, that's cool. So you also deploy your backend on the service, right? Not just databases.
The back end can be done in two ways. I'll just mention this briefly, and we can talk about more in the deploy step. You can deploy it to a serverless kind of function backend through a service like Netlify or Vercel, or you can run it on a literal server like on AWS or Flight Control or something like that. So you will run your backend somewhere. Whether you want to manage a server or not will kind of depend on the needs
Oh,
of your
I see.
specific app and whether you're concerned about cold starts with your Lambda functions.
Got it.
Yep. So with the Railway backend, you'll have a connection string you can grab right here. And all you need to do with that is put it in your .env file. And you're going to want to have, for us, we don't need two databases just because it's a simple demo, but you can have a test database and then an actual production database. We're going to set both of these to the same database right now. And then once you do that, we'll run this command to create our migrations. So our migrations are going to live right here in our DB folder. And the cool thing here is that you'll actually be able to see the exact SQL that's going to be generated and used to apply to your database. So if you're
Mm.
someone who is not, super experienced writing SQL, you can actually kind of learn a little bit on the fly as you're going. So if you wanted to set up a database table yourself, this is the SQL you could run to do it. You create a table, post, ID, title, body, created at. And as I was saying, this will look slightly different if we were doing this with MySQL or SQLite, but Prisma manages the differences through the migration commands.
Nice.
And then one other thing, just kind of show what happened here. If we go back now, this is our database. So we can see we have now a post table with no posts in it. And to create the posts, we can do this scaffold command. This is where the real magic of Redwood in terms of getting set up really quickly and having a kind of instant CRUD interface is good. So what this is going to do is this is going to generate a whole bunch of stuff. And before we even kind of look at all the code it generates, let's go back and see what our actual running project looks like. If we go to /posts, this is now our posts interface. And this is all created for you out of the box. And if we want to create a blog post, do that. And then now we have a blog post. And if we go back to our Railway database, we now see this blog post right here in the data. So this is like what you would get if you were using like Django. They have kind of like an admin interface is what they used to call this. And you can edit posts. And then here we got edit. You can delete posts. It'll ask you if you're sure you want to delete it. I'm going to create just a couple of these. Post 3. And if we want to look at all the code that is doing this, we can take a look in our pages and our components. So the post page is what we're looking at here. And our post components have all this stuff. This is where we have some of the GraphQL things coming into play. Instead of kind of looking through all this code that was just generated, though, let's build up a cell from the ground up. That will be a bit simpler to understand. Cells are really, really cool, and they're one of the unique things about Redwood that when people try Redwood for the first time, this is one of the things that seems to get them really hyped up. So as with all things in Redwood, we can run a command to create our cell. So our cell is going to be called articles. Redwood yarn Redwood generate cell articles. And let's take a look over here. Now, there's a couple things going on in a cell. The important thing, though, is that there's your GraphQL query, and then there's the different output states for your cell. So remind me, did you say you have or have not used GraphQL?
I have used GraphQL, but not heavily. I'm more of the REST guy.
Okay, cool. But you understand like a GraphQL query, and this isn't totally comprehensible to you.
Yeah, definitely. I did write some a week ago for an article I was writing, so still understand it.
Great, that's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
So to make this kind of clear what's going on here, I'm going to import this cell into the home page. So we see here we can import article cell and then plop it right here. So if we go back to our home page, we're going to see that, and that is because I need to change the name of it here. Here. So we actually do this. So if we look at it right now, our GraphQL query is just pulling in the ID of each posts and displaying each post on the page here. Now, if we were to say, it's actually, if we were to just delete all these posts, and we had no posts at all, then we would see something different. We would see the message empty. Now, this is because the cell itself knows how to display the correct state that it is in at any point in time. So you also noticed when I had the wrong name here, we get an error. So it's giving us our error automatically. We didn't have to write any error handling code. And if it's empty, it lets us know it's empty. We don't have to write any empty code. So if we edit this here, we can change what our empty message is, or if we want to change the error, you can blow it. And then look at that. You can see your error message changes. If everything goes according to plan though, and it works out and you have some posts, then the success state is what, and also you see if I refresh, you can kind of see it's loading very, very quickly. And then the last one is the success state. So let's create some posts. Post 1, 2, and post 3. So when we have all of those set up and the success is working, then we can bring in whatever we want from the post. You can see the body, the title, and then the created at date. But the last thing we want to do is we want to make it look a little nice, because right now it's just dumping like a raw, JSON object by JSON.stringifying, which is a nice convention because it means that you're always going to get your data and be able to see it. But what you really want is you want a sweet little React component with some HTML. So if we look at this now, we are mapping over our posts and we're mapping over our articles, and then setting the key to the ID, setting the title to an H2, setting a body to a paragraph, and then setting a create at to a div. So any questions about what's happening with the cell?
Yeah, it's fairly easy to understand. So we have the data source, which is GraphQL, a GraphQL query. Then we have UI states, loading, emptying, failure, then success, which it actually totally makes sense, and it maps well.
Oh, yeah, I'm glad it makes sense, because when you kind of hear it explained abstractly, we say that it's a way to make your data fetching declarative, which can be a little bit of confusing terminology. But once you see it, I think everyone has written this logic where you're like, you get the posts, you set the post to the query, then you do the if posts, or if exclamation point posts, then you get an error message, and then you end up writing this kind of conditional logic to handle whether it's loading, empty, or failure, and then you write your kind of success logic. Whereas Redwood's like, you don't need to do that. Like, you'll never need to do that at any point in time with Redwood. This is all handled for you. So this really saves you a lot of time if you're creating a project with a lot of data fetching. Okay, so this is like our kind of end-to-end page now, or end-to-end project. To kind of get a little bit into the testing stuff, though, let's take a look at just some of the test files that have been generated already. If we look at like our home page here, we can see that we have the kind of basic test. The stuff we're using under the hood is most of your standards React testing library. We have Cypress in here, and we have basically any kind of like basic tests you want to do. I don't write a lot of tests. I'll be honest. I'm a DevRel. DevRels tend to not write a lot of tests, but Redwood really believes that testing is important and that you should have good testing infrastructure already set up for you. So here, this is going to make sure that at least baseline, your home page renders, and it renders correctly. So that's kind of like your first basic test, just to make sure that you're testing all of your pages. And then for your cells, you're also going to be able to test those. So here, we're already going to be testing all of the different states, whether the loading works successfully, whether the empty works successfully, the failure, and the success. So this is testing and verifying that each of your individual actual cell logic functions are all working as intended. And so every time you create a cell, every time you create a page, any of those things, they're always going to have a test already written for you that is at least like a basic TDD type setup, test driven development. So it ensures that if you are too lazy to write tests, there will at least be a test somewhere along the line that will make sure you're not going to shoot yourself in the foot. Let me kick that off. And then if you want to actually run the tests, you do yarn rw test, and it's also going to actually test along with the database. This is why you want to make sure you have the test database set up, or else it's going to throw an error because you don't want to run the actual tests on your production database. But here we're going to see our test suite and our tests. So we got all of our tests passing right here. So that is maybe not super exciting, but if you're someone who is writing a project that's going to need a lot of tests, this will save you a ton of time. Any questions about that?
No, super fine. I think I know jest a bit, so I've done some jest before. I switched to the testing framework I use, so and I
Yes,
like
that was
that.
the one I forgot to mention. It's using Jest under the hood along with React Testing Library, and
Oh,
Cypress has got all those. So if you want
oh,
to test
okay.
your components, if you want to test just basic tech with Jest, or if you want to run an end-to-end test with Cypress, those are all available to you.
That's amazing. Also, I'm aware of React Testing Library. I don't use Cypress. I use Playwright. So, but I do know how it maps, so it's totally fine. Yeah.
Yeah, really, honestly, like Cypress is more so like what Redwood uses to test the Redwood framework. Like Cypress
Oh,
is pretty high level, but you can
okay.
also, if you want to actually test your Redwood app in an end-to-end manner, you can
Mhm.
do that.
Cool.
Cool. So
Uh,
before I deploy it, the last thing I want to show is Storybook. Have you ever used Storybook before?
just once.
Just once, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, a good buddy of mine, Michael Chan, works for Storybook. And it's really great if you are going to be creating a lot of components, or if you have a lot of styling, or you're going to be building like a really involved kind of cell. So if you see here, we've got these different states that your project can be in. But as I was showing here, when you're actually developing, like it's kind of hard to just see the, like if you're refreshing and you can see the loading spinner, or you
Mm-hmm.
can go slow your network down to kind of see the loading, but that's like kind of a lot of friction, where it's a lot easier if you can just see all the different states your cell can be in, and you can kind of test them out. So you can see what your empty is, what your failure is, what your loading is. You can check out what your pages look like, and you can cycle between all of that. Now, one thing that I'm not going to show because we probably won't have enough time, but there's no actual data here. That's because you are able to mock your data. So Redwood also has mocking built in as well. So if you want to mock your API calls, that's kind of one further step that you would do after this.
That's so. This is generated alongside anytime we make a Redwood page, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, and let me show that actually real quick. So when we create a home page, it also creates. So when you create any pages, you're getting three files. You're getting the component itself, you're getting a story file, and you're getting a test file. And this is another thing, if you wanted to use Storybook yourself and you had to actually bring it into your project, you have to install that dependency, you have to create this file, you have to figure out how to import it, you have to figure out how to do this generate thing, you have to figure out what's happening here. And this is all Storybook conventions. That's overhead you have to learn to really get going. Whereas with this, all of this generated out of the box with the CLI, and then you run a single command, and then your Storybook works. So I'd never used Storybook before Redwood. I remember the first time I ever used it with Redwood, like I ran the command, I got this. The way I described it, I felt like Dorothy in Wizard of Oz. The first time she like walks outside, everything's in color for the first time. Just like I was working through this super like low resolution way of creating my components through my dev server and having to like make these hacks to see the different states it was in. And then I ran the Storybook command. I'm like, oh, here it is. It's everything. Like the whole world is in front of me now.
Hmm. Interesting. So there's just this part that I think we could wrap up with because just want to see how it works. So we did speak earlier on about Redwood having stuff like authentication out of the box. Could we see a little bit of
Mhm.
that and a little bit of authorizations where you're logged in before you can be able to like make a post? Just something like that to just see how that works.
That's a good question. So,
Mm-hmm.
kind of the problem with making this simple is that there's many ways to do auth, and I
Okay.
have not used any of them in a while. So you can kind of self-host it yourself through dbauth. You can connect
Copy to
Clerk
cloud.
with Clerk. You can connect Firebase. You can connect kind of Netlify auth. There's also a
Okay.
Superbase kind of integration
Wow.
now. So it was not part of the things that I had prepared for this
Yeah,
demo,
that's
but I would recommend people who want to learn more about the auth. There's a really great resource. This one's a little old, so that might not actually be the best video, but I did a stream with Dom recently where we kind of walked through the newest auth framework. So if you just search Redwood JS 4, you'll find this video with Nick Taylor, and Dom actually gives like a deep dive into the current state of Redwood auth and shows how you can even build your own custom auth provider if you want. So I would direct people to that because that would probably take a little bit more time than we have right now
yeah.
to add that into the demo.
Cool. Yeah, that's actually totally fine. That's like I love the fact there's so many options with the
Yeah, it's
modern
almost too many options,
yeah,
and
so
that's why
many.
I'm like, I know that each of them have their own little weird idiosyncrasies that I have
Mhm.
like not kind of stayed hip to. So I know if I actually pick any of them right now, I'm gonna get tripped up by something.
Okay,
But
so let's deploy.
the last yeah, so the last thing is the deploy step, and this is where you really get a lot of the power because as I was showing with all the different auth providers. It's the same thing with deployment providers. We have an embarrassment of riches in terms of choices. So if you check out the deployment page here, we have options for bare metal, which is just running it on like an Amazon EC2. You can run it on flight control, which is kind of a wrapper around AWS. This is now known as Edgio. Actually, this is no longer layer 0. We need to update this page, but that's my company. And then we
Mhm.
got Netlify, Render, as you had mentioned. This might be getting deprecated actually, so don't use that. And then Vercel. So
Okay.
these are most of the deployment providers that most people are familiar with these days. And let me just go ahead and get this on a Git repo. And because we have all these things already set up, it's very easy to just get it running. So here's the repo that I just created. And then all we got to do is create a new project in Vercel and grab this. And then, yeah, make sure to include your database URL so it's able to connect to that. And then throw that in there. And that's good now. And then this will take probably a couple minutes to deploy. So if you have final kind of wrap up questions for me as this is deploying, that would be
Mhm.
a good time.
Yeah, I think the key takeaway of Redwood is the mastery in orchestrating all these pieces together to give you like a full stack experience. And of course, big one are the generators that just generate your pages and everything you would need, the storybook, the tests, and all. And yeah, so I feel it's like you said, conventions, right? The convention
Mm-hmm.
is good. I could just keep saying similarities and why we would always need a full stack framework as opposed to trying to like piecing things together with something like maybe Next or Nox, where they are good for what they do. But at the end of the day, if you're going to build a full stack application, like you're going to deploy it, you're going to need auth, you're going to need a lot of stuff, you're going to need tests. most people ignore tests, but having a framework that really pushes you to test or give you like the base level of testing is great. And yeah, so I feel Redwood is checking all those boxes for me. It's really, really nice.
Yeah.
Oh, you, oh.
Whoa. What's happening here? Let's see. Oh, I probably should not have refreshed that. Okay. Let that just run again. But
Yeah,
yeah,
for sure.
I think I think you definitely got the idea and what makes Redwood I think really unique and awesome. And I'll see this on Twitter a lot of people kind of like complaining about how there's like no full stack frameworks in JavaScript that have like kind of all the conventions built in. I'll be like, have you checked out Redwood? And the biggest kind of barrier for a lot of people seems to really be GraphQL. Is that either people don't know GraphQL or they've used GraphQL in the past and they felt like it had a lot of overhead. So I really try to stress to people is that if you have used GraphQL in the past and you thought it was really confusing and had a lot of overhead and your project felt really complex, Redwood addresses those concerns. The things that makes people feel like GraphQL is too complicated are one of the main things that Redwood was built for. It's not just built to simplify JavaScript full stack development, is also built to simplify GraphQL development and really kind of getting both of those things to play well together is the thing to do. I don't know why this is not working. That's not usually the problem. So we failed migration.
Something about database schema empty.
Something with the railway database. Let's see. Oh, that's interesting. I think I'm not sure. Somehow I got out of sync with these databases here. Let me do this. Let me grab this database URL and make sure that is what I'm actually doing here with this environment variable. Change. So is that the same thing? Looks like it's the same thing. Let me go back to my project real quick. Oh, I think I know. I think I might be. Let me try. Here, that should be all good. Dev. See what happens. I just run this. This is the first time I've had issues with deploying it in a very, very long time. So
It's the
caught off
demo.
guard.
It's because you're demoing, Anthony.
It's true. The demo gods decided to smite me today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's just the only reason.
Let's go back here and see what we got cooking. Okay, let me do this. Test one, save. So that should all be fine. I'm gonna try this one more time. If it doesn't work, I will have to call Guillermo Rausch and chew him out personally. So let me just wipe this and start over from scratch. And then also to kind of mention some things that you could build with Redwood, I would point people to Everfund. This is one of the kind of flagship apps built
Oh,
with it. This is my co-host on my podcast, Christopher Burns. So that's a really great project that I recommend people check out. Okay,
Mhm.
this looks like it should be doing fine.
Yeah,
Here,
we're back in business.
and deploy. We'll see how that goes now. Cool. The kind of couple other things to talk about is the community. As I mentioned, we have a Discord, we have a forum, community.redwoodjs.com. This is our forum. We have V5 release candidate coming out. This is going to include React 18, background jobs, and cron. Really exciting stuff here. This is going to set us up to hopefully eventually end up in this brand new React Server Components world. We won't be there entirely fully yet, but just upgrading to React 18 will kind of set us up for that area. And we do these monthly town halls that we really recommend people come and check out. We stream them on YouTube and we run them through Luma. So if you want to check that out and hang out in the chat and meet some of the team members, you're welcome to do that. There's also the Redwood Startup Fund. So this is pretty cool. This is something that is specifically for startups who want to build with Redwood, because Redwood, one of the creators is Tom Preston-Warner. Tom Preston-Warner was the original CEO of GitHub. He is very well off financially and is able to invest in both the Redwood project and companies that are using Redwood. There's also a specific kind of climate focused arm. So if you see here, if you're working on climate tech or things related to climate change, then you'll get kind of even more kind of special attention from the startup fund, because that's something that Tom believes in very strongly and wants to help promote. I see a green check. That means I did it. I do
Yeah,
not need to yell at Guillermo Rausch anymore, thankfully.
thank
Okay,
goodness.
so there we go. It works.
Yeah, it
Whew.
works.
Yeah, some of those happened there with the database. Not really sure where
Mhm.
we messed up along the way, but this
Mhm.
is the project. So
For
we made it.
sure. Yeah, we made it. Yeah, thank you so much, Anthony, for finally I have been able to see Redwood in action, and I really
Yeah, I
love
hope it
it.
lived up to the hype.
Yeah, it really does. If I think if you like React, like you have a little bit of React experience, and you like GraphQL, or because we did not even need to touch the GraphQL, and we can
Mhm.
just build our stuff with the generators and everything. So it does make a lot of sense. So thank you. So any final words, plugs you want to plug in because you have license to plug since you're a teacher in this
Yeah,
shows?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Just check out redwoodjs.com. Our Twitter is also redwoodjs. And if you want to follow me, I am AJC WebDev on all places on the internet. My podcast is FSJam. We talked about Redwood a lot in the early days of the show. If you go back here, you can listen to Tom talk about the framework back in 2020, but we've kind of expanded out from there. We talked to lots of people in the community. You can find episodes about Astro, about Solid, about Quick, all the good stuff, even a tiny bit of Web3 if you find that interesting. Not a ton, though. Don't worry if you're offended by that. And the last thing would be just my company. I would definitely recommend Edgio is an awesome deployment platform. We're going to be upgrading our Redwood support in the next couple weeks. So I'll be doing a lot more stuff, kind of showing how to work with Redwood on my company's platform. And we run at scale. So if you need to run at scale, we are your place.
Awesome. Definitely going to check it out myself. And yeah, thank you so much for your time, Anthony. And have a great day.
Yeah, thank you so much. Really appreciate the invite. I had a lot of fun.